Hey everyone. So with AI valuations going through the roof, there's this one big question that's just hanging in the air. A new Deutsche Bank research report asks it point blank, are we in another tech bubble? Well, today we're going to dig right into their findings and see if we can figure this out. You know, for anyone who was around in the late 90s, this all feels, well, a little too familiar, right? You've got the hype, the insane amounts of investment, this feeling that a new technology is about to change absolutely everything. So the report kicks off by asking the most obvious question. Is history just repeating itself? And it's so important to remember this famous warning from Alan Greenspan. But here's the crazy part. He said this in 1996. The dot-com bubble didn't actually pop for more than 3 years after that. It's just a perfect reminder that even when all the warning signs are blinking red, these things can keep running for a long, long time. Okay, so before we go any further, let's get a simple definition on the table. A bubble is basically when prices get totally disconnected from their real fundamental value. The Deutsche Bank report really breaks this down by looking at 3 key areas, and for each one they look at the red flags, the case for a bubble, and the green flags, the case against it.
All right, let's jump in. We're going to follow their roadmap, starting with market valuations, then the incredible amount of money flooding in, and finally the actual technology itself. And we're going to start with the scary stuff. All the evidence that says, yep, this is definitely a bubble.
So first up, what are the biggest warning signs flashing right now? What are the arguments that this whole AI boom is just, a house of cards?
The first red flag is a doozy. This is the Shiller-Cape ratio. It's a tool that smooths out company earnings over 10 years to give us a better sense of market valuation. And as you can see, it is shot past 40. That's getting really, really close to the all-time peak it hit right before the dot-com crash. I mean, that's a serious warning light for the whole market.
Red flag number 2, the sheer mind-boggling amount of money being thrown around. The report projects that by 2030, we're looking at $4 trillion invested in AI data centers. To give you some perspective, that's more than 10 times what it costs to put a man on the moon, even after you adjust for inflation. That is a truly historic level of spending.
And the last big red flag is the technology itself. I mean, for all the amazing demos we see, we know these models have a tendency to just make things up, what everyone calls hallucinations. They can also be really hard to roll out in a big company, and some experts think we're actually starting to hit some real physical limits on how much bigger and better we can even make them.
But here's the thing. That's only one side of the coin. For every single one of those scary red flags, the report finds a really strong counterargument, a green flag, that says, hey, maybe this time really is different.
So let's go back to that valuation fear. Yeah, the overall market looks pricey. But here's the key difference from the dot-com days. Back then, you had sky-high stock prices with zero profits. Today's tech giants, they actually have the earnings to back it up. The report shows that their high valuations are totally justified by massive earnings growth. They're expensive for a very good reason.
And this slide, wow, this really shows you where the real craziness might be. It's a simple price-to-sales ratio, just comparing a company's stock price to its revenue. And look at this. Public companies like NVIDIA and Microsoft, while definitely high, are valued way more sanely than private AI players like OpenAI and Anthropic. It really suggests the most extreme bubble behavior is happening behind closed doors in the private markets.
Okay, so what about that $4 trillion investment number? Well, how it's being paid for is a huge deal. The report finds that the biggest players, the so-called hyperscalers like Google and Microsoft, are funding this whole expansion mostly out of their own pockets from their enormous cash reserves. They're not piling on a mountain of debt. That makes the whole system way, way more stable than past bubbles. And finally, what about the tech hitting a wall? All the evidence says, not yet. I mean, the recent launch of models like Google's Gemini 3 showed huge leaps forward, especially in totally new areas like understanding images and video. The innovation engine is still firing on all cylinders.
So you've got this balanced picture, red flags on one side, green flags on the other. But this whole debate is so much bigger than just tech investors, because right now this boom has become the main engine for the entire economy. This chart is just incredible. It shows that if you take out all the investment spending related to tech and AI, the rest of the US economy is basically flat, dead in the water. Without this boom, the US would probably be in or very, very close to a recession. It is that important. So, if it's not a simple, clear-cut bubble, does that mean everything's fine? We're in the clear? Well, not exactly.
The report wraps up by pointing out 5 specific fault lines. These are potential risks that could still trip up the whole AI revolution.
So here are the 5 big ones we need to keep an eye on. A weird circular financing loop, the risk that debt could become a problem later, the tech just not delivering on its promises, a huge social and political backlash, and finally some serious bottlenecks in the physical supply chain. Let's dig into a couple of the biggest ones.
Let's start with this first risk, which the report calls circular money. It's this really fascinating and kind of weird setup. You've got a tech giant like Microsoft investing billions in a startup like OpenAI. Then OpenAI turns right around and spends a massive chunk of that investment on cloud computing. From Microsoft, you see the loop. It can create this self-reinforcing cycle where it's actually really hard to tell what anything is truly worth on its own.
Another huge risk is the social backlash, and this chart shows this massive split in public opinion. In places like China, people are pretty much all in on AI. But in developed countries like Germany and the US, a growing number of people are pushing back, worried about jobs and losing control, and that could easily lead to some really tough regulations that slow the whole thing down.
And that brings us to the final risk, and honestly, it might be the most real one of all. This isn't about stock prices or software code. It's about a hard physical limit, the absolutely massive and growing demand for electricity to power all of this stuff.
And the scale of this is just staggering. According to the data in the report, global electricity demand from data centers is on track to be 4 times larger in 2030 than it was just back in 2020. Our power grids were just not built for that kind of insane growth.
And that kind of leaves us with this one last provocative thought. After looking at all the financial pros and cons of a bubble, the report suggests the biggest threat might not be irrational exuberance at all. It might be something way more basic. Can we physically generate enough power to keep the lights on for this revolution? A question that's not about finance, but about physics.